In 1979, the Jesus film was produced by the Campus Crusade for Christ, now known as Cru. To date, it is the most widely viewed movie in history. It has been seen by over 8 billion people. Actually, it's been seen over 8 billion times by over 4 billion people on the earth. It's officially recognized by the Guinness Book of World Records to be the most translated film ever, available in 2,200 languages. Can you imagine that? The next globally viewed movie ever is good guesses. Good, Die Hard. Well, I just watched Apollo 13 the other day. Is the 1997 Titanic. You remember that one? That was huge. That was a huge one. DiCaprio and all that, man. We don't have the exact numbers, but I'm going to be very generous, extremely generous, because we don't have the exact numbers. I'm going to say maybe 1 billion views worldwide. That's a lot of views. We know it's surpassed about 500 million, but it has a popularity in China and other places in the East, and that is why it is the second most viewed film in the world. But being generous, maybe 1 billion. That's being super generous. Now, to put things into perspective, at the time of its production, Titanic was the most expensive film produced, and it costed $200 million to produce. The Jesus film?
30 grand.
It was $6 million. I mean, you got to take everyone over to Israel. It was filmed in Israel. $6 million. $6 million. In 2014, this is over a decade ago, it was estimated that over 200 million people had been so impacted by the Jesus film that they indicated they wanted to be followers of Jesus. 200 million people just over a decade ago from this one film. Here's my question, how could a movie with such a meager budget become the most widely seen, widely translated, influential movie ever to exist on this earth? How? It simply captured the life of Jesus. That's all it did. In fact, get this. It is so simple that unlike maybe you've seen the Chosen series or some other Christian movies that add a lot of, spice to the plot and all of that, the Jesus film is simply and literally the good news translation of the Gospel of Luke. It is literally a reading of the Gospel of Luke with picture. Well, today, we start our new series through that very same gospel in which the movie was based. And as one of my profs noted a while ago, it seems appropriate that a film which has been dubbed into more languages and seen by more diverse people groups than any other is based on Luke's gospel, because Luke intentionally wrote it to show that salvation is for everyone. This is also why I've given as our series title, can we put that up there? Follow Me, the highly celebrated and definitive account of the inspiring story of Jesus of Nazareth. That's pretty good, right? That's pretty good. I thought there's a lot of intention that went in that. That's pretty good. It has the feel of a biography or a documentary, right? And that's because that is exactly what this gospel is. Besides theater back in the day, this was the ancient form of movie. And as we'll see today in Luke's introduction and throughout the rest of this gospel, it was explicitly written to be the most widely read, definitive and comprehensive, and aesthetically beautiful and compelling narrative of the life of Jesus written to that date. Explicitly, that's why Luke wrote it. Thus, it's fitting, as my teacher mentioned, that the movie just so happens to be based off this and is the most widely viewed movie on the face of the earth. But there's one question that's going to come up over and over. It's underneath every single passage in this. It's the question that Jesus asks Matthew: will you follow me? That will come up over and over again. More than any other gospel, Luke highlights the theme of journeying with Jesus. In fact, it's unique that Jesus spends 10 chapters in this gospel journeying to Jerusalem with his disciples while he's mentoring them along the ways. Luke is chronicling the greatest story about undeniably the greatest and most influential figure in all of history. And at every step of the way, the invitation goes out to anyone who would read. Will you choose to join the story? Will you choose to follow me? That's the big picture for us this morning. That's where we're heading. I haven't outlined the book yet. I just did the intro. So I don't know how many weeks it's going to take to get through this thing. Probably a long time. But for this morning, I want to provide a little intro to this gospel that is really just based off his intro. Uniquely, Luke actually gives an intro. A lot of the other gospel writers don't. So we're going to look at what he is giving for us so that we can understand what is he aiming for and what does he expect us to take as we read this. What can we look forward to? What is he expecting us to gather from this book as we read it? Okay, I don't have anything fancy for you. I'm not here to share my personal opinions and views and beliefs. He has an intention. He wrote the most definitive, compelling documentary that's truthful, that can be grounded in history than anywhere else. And so we're just going to look at what he has to say this morning. I hope that's okay with you. Number one, Luke writes his gospel, as I mentioned, to be the definitive account. He intentionally writes this gospel to be the definitive account of the story of Jesus. You can put the verses back on, verses 1 through 4, or at least verse 1. Luke essentially states this in the intro. In verse 1, he acknowledges that there are many other gospels in circulation at this time, or other writings at this time. Now, undoubtedly, Mark, the Gospel of Mark in your Bible, was already written at this time. Most will believe it was probably sitting on his desk. He's using it as a resource as he is writing his own gospel, as well that he's using all kinds of other sources too. I won't bore you with the scholarly consensus on what sources is he using, but he's using many other sources. See, likely there were numerous records of aspects of Jesus's life and teachings that various eyewitnesses have preserved, but coming from only one individual's account or experience with Jesus, they're not exhaustive. All of these things are kind of a holistic picture of this man. To date, Mark is probably the most exhaustive account of Jesus's life. And most scholars will believe that this is simply Peter's account. This is simply the Apostle Peter's testimony of his time with Jesus. Mark was the earliest gospel written. Most people will easily, comfortably date this between early 50s to early 60s AD. If you do the math real quick, that's 20 to 30 years after Jesus' death. At most 30 years after his death. That's not, contrary to what some say, that's not enough time to create, kind of legends and myths, and there's not enough time for that. This is easily dated within 20 years of his death. And Mark has his own reasons for why he's compiling his gospel. Most likely, the reason is that Peter knows that his time is short. He knows that, the apostles have targets on their back, and many people are probably saying, Peter, we want you to preserve the story, your account of the story. And so Mark, by the way, is related to Peter, in case you didn't know. So Mark's a cousin of Peter. And so Mark pens, it's called the Gospel of Mark. It's literally Peter's story of his time with Jesus. But it's only his story. It's not meant to be an exhaustive account of who this man is and his beginning. That's why Mark just jumps right in with Jesus' ministry. It doesn't talk about his infancy. It doesn't talk about his birth. It doesn't talk about in that. And even his ending is kind of like lacking too. It's just Peter's account. But Luke is writing at a different time, a different date. He's got a different audience. He's got something different in mind. Bear with me this morning, guys. I'm sorry, we're laying a lot of foundation here, but it's super important that we know why, what this is saying and why would we even believe it. Luke is writing, most scholars would say, between 65 and 75. Anywhere in that range, we can't know for sure, but between 65 and 75. So a little bit after Peter, and he has a different audience. He has a different time. He's in a different era. And so that being the case, he realizes, I don't really have something adequate. Like, I don't have something I would actually use to read about this. I need to compile something that I would use myself and that I think would be adequate for my purposes to giving a whole picture of who this man actually is. Also, unlike Mark and unlike Peter, he's Greek. He's not a Hebrew. And he's not just any Greek. He's a very affluent, educated Greek. He's not a fisherman. He's very intelligent, and he's from the highest social classes of the time. We know this because of the way he writes this letter in Greek is super polished Greek. When you compare that to Mark's gospel, it's like, oh my gosh, do you even know how to write Greek? It's really rough and very, simple. But this is super polished Greek. Even his intro, this intro we read today, this is a standard historiographical, they call it, introduction to a history work, which there's not that many written. People don't just have the leisure to write books back then. They can barely read. So if you know how to write an introduction to a history when there's only 4 histories of Caesar Augustus on the planet Earth that have ever been penned, and then there's 4 about a backwater Jew named Jesus. When you know how to write an introduction that people read and say, oh my gosh, this guy is a super educated Greek elite, highly affluent. That's what he's writing here. He's a doctor by profession. Paul calls him a physician. He's a doctor by profession. So think of any MD you might know. That's Luke. He also has an eye for aesthetics. Some of the most famous art is based off this gospel. Think of Rembrandt's The Prodigal Son, right? He has an eye to aesthetics, but he has the mind of a scientist. Being such, he's been on the hunt to get at the bottom. What is the truth of this thing of Christianity? Who really is this person named Jesus? He's been at the hunt from the very beginning. And by God's providence, he just happened to meet the right people, to be in the right place and the right time. I mean, he traveled with Paul. We see he met Paul in Acts, probably in the city called Troas. He traveled with Paul the apostle himself. Not only that, he went with Paul back to Jerusalem where he got arrested. Think about what that means. He's met the apostles. He's met Peter. He's met James. He knows John Mark. He knows Barnabas. He obviously had interviews with Mary Magdalene many times, because he knows a lot of information about women. He's met Jesus's mom probably, most likely, because he has a ton of information. This is the man that we are talking about, just to give you perspective here. He's been doing serious investigative journalism with the very same people who actually walked with Jesus. And so this is the sense I got as I was putting this together this morning. The sense I got, he thinks he's not just writing a practically, important, this is expedient for me to pen this gospel. He's starting to feel the burden and the responsibility for producing something for the church. Right? He knows he's being called to make a contribution for the cause of Christ. You know, it's like when the stars align in your life and you realize it's like, I was destined for this. I think that's the sense Luke actually, in his preface, is conveying to us. I'm not just exploring, no, there's been too many circumstances, I've met too many people, I've scraped too far to the bottom of this thing that I realize right now, ooh, like a game of cat and mouse, I've been caught. And I'm being called to do this, and I must do it. That's the sense I get from this. Now, does he know that he's writing the divinely authoritative biography of Jesus, which will carry the Holy Spirit inspired seal of the church throughout thousands of years? I don't know if he thought of it quite along those lines, but he does feel compelled and called to write the definitive account of the life of Jesus to date. And he knows he's doing that. He says explicitly, verse 3, with this in mind, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning. Remember, he has the mind of a scientist. From the moment he came to faith, he's been on a search. He's been, is this true? Is this really credible? I know it's rocking my world, but is it true? From the very beginning, he's been on a search. And not only from the very beginning of his journey, but he's saying, I've investigated things from the beginning, meaning I'm going back to the beginning of the story, which happens actually even before Jesus came on the scene. He's talking to the mother of Jesus saying, when was the very first moment you heard about this? And he's penning those. And then he's even going back further. He's probably got a copy of the Greek Old Testament on his desk. And he's tying in the story. And he's seeing all that was prophesied. From the very beginning, I've carefully investigated everything, he says. Therefore, he says, I too decided to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus. See, at this very preface, at the beginning, he's saying, I'm writing you an accurate, what I'm saying is the truth. It's accurate and it's orderly. In a nutshell, I am writing you the definitive account of the Jesus story. Have you ever asked yourself, what really is the truth about this man named Jesus? Have you ever asked yourself, what's really at the bottom of this thing called Christianity? What's really at it? What's really at the bottom of it? What is it all about? You know, because you've heard many things from many different people and many different parties. You've heard all kinds of stuff about him. And we've all grown up in traditions that have told us different things about him. But have you ever asked, who really is he? What really is he about? What really is this thing, Christianity? Well, you're in good company this morning, because nobody has the credentials and the authority to speak definitively about the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus than this book that we're going to read right now. Nobody has the authority to speak definitively about it. So you can throw out what your echo chambers have said. Luke is going to disrupt all of those things. Why are we going through the Gospel of Luke? It is the definitive account of the life and teachings of the single most important and influential person of all of history. I hope that's enough for you. That's enough for me, so that's why I'm going through this book. And I invite you to join the journey every single Sunday. And if you want to be part of our Wednesday, we're a sermon-based group, you're welcome to come there. We have other wonderful groups too that you can join. We'll have the sign-up sheet next week. We want you to be part of any one of these groups. But I invite you to join me as we focus on this person. As a corollary to this, he says, I decided to write an order account for you, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know the certainty of the things you have been taught. Number two, Luke writes this gospel to provide grounding and assurance about Jesus and how to follow his way of life. He wants us to have a grounding and assurance about who this person is and what it actually looks like in our day to follow him. This word certainty is the Greek asphaleia. Asphaleia conveys the idea of stability. Luke says he's writing so that we may know the truth and consequently the stability or the security that comes from knowing the truth. In fact, this is where the English word asphalt comes from. Asphaleia comes from asphalt. Luke is saying, I am explicitly writing an exhaustive, honest account of Jesus to be a path and a sturdy foundation for you to follow him on confidently. That's what he's saying. How many of you would like a little more certainty and confidence about Jesus and what exactly it means to follow his way of life in our time? Anybody? If you want to lay a solid foundation for who he is and what it actually means to follow him, you're in the right place. And I don't know about you, but I feel that this is so important for us today because, to be honest, I'll speak for myself, simply trying to understand Jesus and his message today can be kind of confusing. I'll just speak for myself. I don't know if you relate with that. There's so many representations of Jesus in our time and day that it can be kind of confusing to boil down what really is his message. Who really is he? What did he come to do? You know, there's this always affirming social justice Jesus of the left, right? You've met that one before. And then there's also the nationalistic, gun-touting, libertarian Jesus of the right, right? You're familiar with that one too, right? He's not always the nicest. There's the Jesus of the charismatics. And then there's the Jesus of the ivory tower scholars. There's the Jesus of, well, of course, Christians, but then there's Jesus of Catholics. And then there's the Jesus of the cults. And have you ever met the conspiracy theorist Jesus? Seems floating around on your social media feeds, right? You ever met someone that followed the conspiracy theorist Jesus? I've met a few people. I got enough anxiety in my life. I don't want that Jesus. I'll just tell you right up front. If that's the real Jesus, I don't want him. I don't need the conspiracy theorist Jesus. But what about the gospel? There's the wealth, health, prosperity gospel. Always healing, always miracles, always blessing, always wealth, always up and to the right. Hey, but if you don't like that one, there's the other option. It's always polarizing too, right? There's never a middle ground. There's the other option. Hey, there is the gospel of poverty mentality if you want that one too. There really is. You can reinforce your poverty and feel good about yourself. Which one am I supposed to follow? It's confusing sometimes, right? There's the gospel of liberation and social action. And then there's the gospel that unfortunately is pretty predominant in our circles right now, and in especially the right, that reinforces oppression and promotes inaction. There's that one too if you want to follow it. This was the same stuff that went around in the civil rights, remember? There was a gospel of a black pastor who said, God is about freedom, and I want freedom. And then there was a gospel being preached in different pulpits of the same places, saying, don't rock the boat too much. Is that really the gospel? It gets confusing. We live in a disorienting time. But I want you to know that the truth was, it's always been confusing. And people have always desired to distort and abuse the word of God. Always. Why else do you think Luke is writing this gospel to relieve their uncertainty? Why else do you think he's writing to relieve their uncertainty? Here's the truth, friends. It's always been difficult. It's always been confusing, and there have always been people that have wanted to hijack Jesus for their own cause. It's always been like that. Put yourself in their shoes. This is what Luke is addressing, a little bit different in their time, but to be a Christian at that time meant at best you were a social outcast in the Roman Empire. At worst, you were persecuted. Choose your option. On top of that, by the time Luke is writing now, the Jewish-Christian divide was pretty much complete. We're talking 65, 75. See, remember in the beginning, right? Jesus is a Jew. Like, Christianity is a Jewish movement. It stemmed from that, and there was all the first Christians were Jews. But as time goes on, lines are drawn even more. At first, it was like, this is a sect of Judaism. Now, the lines are clear. No, you're not a sect. You're heretics. Christianity is not accepted. And it's almost as if in this period of time, when Luke is writing, those first Jews that believed in Jesus are on one side, and those who do not believe are on another, and the line is very clear, and there's not a lot of crossing the line at this point anymore. That's the time period in which he's writing. And the reality is that Christianity is becoming increasingly Gentile, not Jewish in shape. Why that? And why the question of if Jesus is Jewish and this thing, why are so many Jews? Why have so many rejected it? Of course, not all of them did. They were all first Jews, but why have so many still to this day have rejected it? These are confusing issues to wrestle with, right? In essence, what's underneath all of these questions is, who is actually the people of God? Who is interpreting the scriptures faithfully? Whose character has the stamp of divine authority? Or divine authenticity, sorry. Have you ever asked those questions before? Who's actually interpreting scripture right here? Because I just heard the other day, like, there's so many different interpretations of it. Really? Or is there so many abuses of it? You ever ask those questions? Who really is in? Who's really out? Who's faithfully interpreting? And what really is the stamp of character that we're supposed to look like? Because the left and the right and this and that is all sharing their own perspective on what it's supposed to look like. Maybe you're asking these questions. Maybe you've asked them before. Maybe you're searching. Maybe you're deconstructing. Hey, there's no better place for you than to ask these questions than here today with Luke, because he explicitly wrote this gospel for you. For you. The gospel is written to provide a grounding and assurance about Jesus and his way of life for us. That's why he wrote. We'll unpack it as we go. That leads us to our last point this morning. Number 3, Luke writes his gospel to invite everyone to join the journey of following Jesus. He writes it explicitly to invite every single person. Now, I mentioned already this was a huge emphasis in the gospel, right? Jesus journeys on the road to Jerusalem with the disciples for 10 chapters. And then there's a journey with 2 of his disciples at the end of the book on the road to Emmaus. Interesting, huh? I'll leave the punch for that later. But even in Acts, you might recall the earliest Christians were called, Christianity was called back then, does anyone remember?
The way.
The Way. It was originally called The Way. See, the whole book is an invitation to follow the way of Jesus. It's an invitation to join the journey of following Jesus along the way. And this particular way of Jesus or way of life is marked by some utterly distinct characteristics. I won't go through all of them, but let me highlight 3 that are going to come up over and over and over and over again in this book. These are the marks of the followers of the way. Number 1, they're marked by fervent prayer. Over and over again, we see Luke highlighting Jesus prayed. Jesus, more than the other gospel writer does, he talks about all the different times Jesus prayed and how long he prayed and where he prayed. And he highlights prayer. And the connection between Jesus's prayer life and his power is so clear that the disciples ask him, teach us to pray, because we see the connection. See, we learn in this gospel that the life of the follower of Jesus isn't so much marked by wise planning and strategy as it is by prayer. And above all, it's marked by the persistent, expectant kind of prayer you see in the widow. Many different parables he talks about, expectant and persistent prayer that his kingdom would come on earth and that he would come soon. Secondly, it's marked by radical generosity. Radical generosity. Luke records more teachings from Jesus about money than any other gospel. And I think this is interesting. Think about it. Luke is a very affluent person. He comes from a high strata of society. And probably Theophilus is too. I didn't get to mention him. Theophilus is probably the patron of this work. So although Luke dedicates this book to Theophilus, he's not the only reader of the work. He didn't write, I guarantee he didn't. This is a 10,000, in today's standard, this would cost $10,000 to produce this. It would be on a 35-foot scroll. It's the largest scroll you can buy in that time. Luke would not have produced that for one guy named Theophilus. Theophilus is probably a new follower of Jesus, and he's the patron. He sponsored this because he believes it and he wants it to get out to everyone. So it's actually for everyone. But I find it interesting that Luke is highlighting the sayings of Jesus regarding money more than any other gospel. And we have the wealthiest people backing and reading this gospel. See, sometimes it isn't until you have a lot of something that you have a vantage point from which you can see clearer than others the hollow promise of it. I think they see that clearer than most because they had it. They had money. They had wealth. They were at the top of the food chain. Remember the Jim Carrey quote? I love this quote. You ever heard the Jim Carrey quote on money? So good. We got it up there? Here, listen to Jim Carrey's quote. I love this. I think everybody should get rich and famous and do everything they ever dreamed of so they can see it's not the answer. That's what Jim Carrey said. Everyone should be just like me, he's saying, so you can realize it's not what you think it is. But Jesus isn't entirely he's not just only pessimistic about money in this gospel. It is a great danger. He warns us of. Money is a great danger. It's a temptation. It's a lure. It causes you to think that there's more of something than it really can pay out. But it can also, he tells us in this gospel, be a great tool in the hands of his followers to further his kingdom and to alleviate the sufferings of the poor. It's not entirely bad. It's also a great tool. The key is, who is your master? Is it mammon? Is it money? Or is it the Messiah? Radical generosity is the certifying characteristic of the follower of Jesus. Radical generosity is the certifying characteristic of the follower of Jesus. Lastly, the way is marked by compassionate inclusivity. Compassionate inclusivity. Every single person is invited to be part of the family of God. The church, in fact, explicitly exists as a counter-cultural community that does not draw its boundaries according to the criteria of this world. As Jesus eats meals with more sinners, forgives more prostitutes, allows more foreigners, and elevates more women and minorities than any other gospel, everyone is welcomed with lavish hospitality and befriended in Jesus' family. Just as Jesus included the poor, the rich, Jew, Gentile, male, female, slave, free, the physically whole, physically disabled, so the way of Jesus is not marked by social status or political party, a particular culture or ethnicity, whether you're married or single, male or female, but by a common submission to the lordship of Jesus and a commitment to selflessly serve his people of all stripes and colors, be them red or blue or black or white. The way of Jesus is marked by lavish hospitality and compassionate inclusivity of every single person on the face of this earth. Now, the world may grumble and criticize us as being too idealistic and pragmatically foolish. We must follow the way of Jesus, exemplified in his interaction with Zacchaeus, to seek and save all who are lost, because they too are children of Abraham. Compassionate inclusivity is the authenticating seal of the way of Jesus. And that's why, by the way, if you didn't know, our very first value is diverse community. We try our best, and we're not perfect, to celebrate diversity. Whatever culture, whatever background, whatever ethnicity, whatever color, whatever political party, whatever you are from, all are invited. And I hope to God that our church will always reflect that. Because if it doesn't, we got to ask ourselves some tough questions. It's a compelling vision, is it not? That's the whole point. It's a compelling vision of what the world could be and what the kingdom of God is. Jesus tells us to pray specifically, bring that kingdom on earth. Jesus is inviting in this gospel us to his original vision for creation, the one that went awry, but he returned, lived, died, and rose again to bring to fruition. That is what it means to follow Jesus Christ. And at first, to be clear, it might feel like you're traveling to Jerusalem for crucifixion. It will feel hard if you want to follow his way. But Emmaus and the resurrection are on the other side. As one commentator says, Luke will not argue and strong-arm anyone into receiving the good news of God's saving work. He's not about, hey, get in or get out. Everyone's invited. Wherever you're at in the journey, you're invited and you're welcome, and it's your choice to join. Let me ask you a question as we close right here. Are you tired of the way this world is? Are you tired? Again, sometimes in order to see the world clearly, you have to come from a specific vantage point. And when life is great and you're riding high, sometimes you just don't see things clearly. And so I ask you again, are you tired of the way the world is? That's what Jesus really asks us this morning. And he invites us into his vision for humanity. He invites us into his vision for the world. It isn't the popular path. It doesn't have great budgets like Titanic. It isn't well funded by wealthy investors. It is daring, it's dangerous, it's difficult, but it is the way. It is the way. It's the way of Jesus. It's the way of life. And so the only question he really asks us this morning is, will you follow me? Will you follow me?